About our guest of honor this evening before they take it away. So Liz Moore is the author of the New York Times best-selling novel Long Bright River, which was a Good Morning America book club pick and one of Barack Obama's favorite books of 2019, as well as the acclaimed novels Heft and The Unseen World. A winner of the 2014-2015 Rome Prize in Literature, she lives in Philadelphia. And my favorite terrible thing is Madeleine Henry's third novel. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the New York Post, and Entertainment Weekly. Previously, she worked at Goldman Sachs after graduating from Yale. She lives with her husband in New York, where she is at work on her next book. And for more information, you can visit itsmadeleinehenry.com. As for the book of the hour, in author's disappearance, a detective on the hunt for the truth and curious clues within the pages of a novel. My favorite terrible thing is sure to satisfy mystery fans. We are so happy to have Madeleine and Liz joining us for a thrilling evening of suspense and deception. So I'm going to go ahead and let the two of them get started, and then I will be back later for Q&A. Have fun, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. Hi, Madeleine. How you doing?
Hi, Liz. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm so excited to chat with you.
I am also excited to chat with you about your book, which I finished and absolutely loved. I think for those of you who are attending tonight, you are really in for a treat if you're not one of the lucky people who got an early copy like I was. It's super twisty and it gets like very dark, but it's also very immersive and it's set in this community that is really kind of fun to read about. And I just was very hooked from the beginning. So congrats, first of all, on the accomplishment of writing this.
Oh, that's very kind coming from you, Liz. That's very kind. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right. So for people who have not read My Favorite Terrible Thing, can you start by just telling everybody what the book is about?
Definitely. So this book starts with a disappearance, and the world famous author, Claire Ross, goes missing on the morning of her wedding. Now, Claire wrote a very interesting book. She wrote an epic love story about soulmates who reincarnate and find each other in every lifetime across historical eras. So they find each other in ancient Rome and off the coast of Madagascar in the golden age of pirates, and in Philadelphia during the yellow fever epidemic in 1793, and onward into the future. And it took Claire 10 years to perfect this book, which is something that her fans appreciate, sometimes to the point of madness. So after 2 months without any leads, Claire's mom hires the private investigator, Nina Travers, to try and find her daughter. So there's a missing person story here, but it's also about fandom and obsession and the line between fiction and reality.
Excellent. So what was kind of like the first spark of this book? What was the first thing that arrived to you, or what was its inspiration?
Yeah, so I would say that a few years ago, I was reading a mix of books on spirituality and books by Kristen Hanna. And I was so moved by Kristen Hanna's historical fiction, where the stakes are so high and people are enduring such brutality and hardship. And the concerns of her novels made a lot feel trivial by comparison. And I really wanted to write something as meaningful, spotlighting characters who were facing real trial. And at the same time, I was reading books by Michael Singer and Marianne Williamson, books that were about disconnecting from the mind and reconnecting to your spiritual core, which is just a whole other conversation just beyond the scope of this one. So I'm just going to leave that one there. And so in the crazy cauldron of my mind, I had on one hand the concept of souls and spiritual journeys, and on the other hand, high stakes in historical fiction. And I just had the spark for a story about soulmates who reincarnated and found each other in every lifetime across historical eras. because then I could show the soulmates in the high stakes situations, like the ones that moved me in Kristen Hanna's books. And I actually did work on that story for months and months and months. I called it the Starlit Ballet. I researched every time period. I wrote hundreds of pages belonging to this book. And funnily enough, when I was on tour for my last release, I said outright that that was the premise for my next novel. I was very open about it. But over time, I realized that my favorite part about that story, The Starlit Ballet, was analyzing it and discussing the bigger themes and ideas within it. So I ended up building an entirely new novel around it. I started writing a new mystery that was thinking, okay, well, what if this author disappeared? And so I wrote that new manuscript and I wove her book in through an alternating chapter format. So one chapter in the missing author story and one chapter of her book. And that was actually the version of My Favorite Terrible Thing that we originally sold to my editor. But even in that form, it truly was still too unwieldy because of the breadth of the Starlit Ballet. There were too many characters and too many settings, just too much to keep track of. And it was not a seamless reading experience. So ultimately, I reduced that epic love story down even further to the one sentence excerpts that are sprinkled throughout My Favorite Terrible Thing. And while there are plenty references to her book in My Favorite Terrible Thing, the primary text is almost gone. But looking back, I do think it was a worthwhile experience. I've actually heard of something like this happening to other authors. When Marisha Pessl wrote Night Film, for example, about the director Cordova, she actually wrote his screenplays as part of her process, which never made it into her book. So my detour just ended up being part of the world building. And I do think it was useful because it added real depth to the Starlit Ballet. And so hopefully her book feels real in My Favorite Terrible Thing, because it was.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it does. There is a real sense that there's something that exists like right beneath the surface, in many senses of what's going on the page. And that makes a lot of sense that that was all of the back.
It was good for something.
that So what kind of research went into the process then of writing, I guess first the Starlit Ballet itself and then sort of transforming it into the book that exists now?
Yeah, so with regards to writing the Starlit Ballet, I would find usually one nonfiction book for each time period and use it as a springboard and go from there. I did read more primary sources when it came to the Oregon Trail, when I sought out the actual journals of people who'd made the trek. And those were really good for very visual, specific details, like people would hang their washed diapers with thorns on the canvas sides of their wagon, and people would pack eggs for the trip in cornmeal, like little details that I just loved to learn. I would also listen to historical fiction set in the different time periods. There were a lot of great novels, particularly set in ancient Rome, that I found to be really entertaining and just spark a lot of interesting questions. So I'd have historical fiction going on audiobooks as I went about my non-writing life, just so that the mood of the different time periods would really seep in. But as I said, the entire Starlit Ballet went through a process of being gradually withdrawn from this mystery. Interestingly enough, though, I think that all of my fascination with the story remains. All the reasons why I loved the Starlit Ballet are spelled out in My Favorite Terrible Thing through the eyes of Claire's fans, seen through Nina's eyes, and there are discussions of the themes and symbols and layers. And to characterize it favorably, it's like reading all the reviews for a book that might distill its impact with just enough snippets of text to seed the imagination. So maybe the fruits of all that labor are still there, just in a really, really altered form.
Great. Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about Nina, the main character, and the private detective who narrates the book. So how did she come together?
Yeah, so the seed of Nina, what I knew about her before I knew anything else was that I wanted her character to be neglected at the start of the novel. I wanted her to be overlooked and underestimated. And so I really played up the invisibility of her profession. As a private investigator, her job is to go unseen in a lot of circumstances, and she has to be consumed with the details of other people's lives with no spotlight on her own gifts or inner world. I also wrote her employers to be the kind of people to disregard her. So they never say her name. It's not clear if they know her name. They don't acknowledge her outside of work. And no matter how creatively or diligently she does anything for them, all her jobs are confidential, so her work is continually going unrecognized. But it's not all bad news, because Nina sees that there's a certain power in being invisible and in being overlooked, because when people don't see you as, important, then they're not as self-conscious around you, and they'll act in ways they wouldn't otherwise, sometimes revealing crucial details. On a related note, I actually went to a true crime and mystery festival recently, the Hamptons Whodunit, which was really fun. And there was a panel there. It was Ruth Ware, Jean Kwok, and Peter Swanson all talking about Agatha Christie. And at one point, they were all talking about Miss Marple. And there are obviously significant differences between Nina and Miss Marple, but they did have that one thing in common, which is that they were overlooked and underestimated. And in Miss Marple's case, it was because she was a, quote, little old lady who'd never been outside the town. And so people wouldn't censor themselves around her. So like Nina, Miss Marple derived this great advantage from being overlooked. And one more example would be the Molly heroine in Nita Prose's The Maid series. So Molly has a job where she also can feel invisible as a maid at the Regency Grand Hotel. So people are constantly discounting her and not being as self-conscious around her. And then Molly, of course, goes on to be instrumental in solving the murder at her hotel. And so I bring up those examples just to emphasize that this seems to be a dynamic explored by other writers, that when you're discounted, it can give you a lot of really interesting data about other people.
That's great. So one of the things that I noticed, I hear a lot about in this exact moment is the idea of the parasocial relationship, where fans will sort of project a relationship onto a celebrity in some capacity. And this book, I think, fits really nicely into that conversation, because in many ways it's just about fandom, among other things. And so I'm wondering if you can kind of share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for context, Claire's book has a really devoted group of fans. They call themselves Starlights, and Reddit is their campfire in a way. It's where they gather to share photos of her and updates on her life and interpretations of her book. And their curiosities and obsessions with her, they do cross some boundaries. And at the start of the novel, Claire's fiance, Roger, believes that a fan has kidnapped her. So without spoilers, there's already a lot about fandom in this book. And the novel does go on to explore a few ideas there. And one that I can share is that extremely successful artists, people like Claire, might be a lot stranger than we understand. And who knows the truth, but this is just an idea in the novel up for discussion. And it's interesting because in order to become an extremely successful artist, you have to create something that resonates with a really large group of people. However, thinking critically about the everyday life of a very successful artist, it doesn't take long to realize how extremely weird and isolating that must be. And so, no matter how relatable they seem at the end of the day, and no matter how their work makes us feel, at the end of the day, how relatable are they? And my favorite terrible thing goes on to consider, well, who would be really compatible with an extremely successful artist, someone like Claire? Would their ideal partner also have to live an extremely unusual life and be the kind of person who doesn't go out in public all that often, or who misses out on a lot of, quote, normal experiences? And it's an interesting idea because the novel wonders if someone who seems to represent the best of us would actually be compatible with someone who would be rejected by most of society, somebody on the fringe. And so it's just an idea that the novel puts out to consider.
Were you inspired by any real world fan communities while writing your book?
Yeah, I actually have been asked that quite a bit about this book, and it's a very fair question. And to answer that first, I will give more context about the Starlights. So these fans love her book, but they're even more obsessed with Claire herself, which is a rare kind of fame for an author to achieve. If you think about it, most fandoms in fiction are for the characters. So Potterheads dress up as Harry Potter and Hermione Granger, and Twihards as Bella Swan and Edward Cullen. But on Halloween, for example, Starlights dress up as Claire. So Starlights are already unusual for an author fandom. They're more similar to the fans that you'd see for pop stars, but even then, Starlights are unusual. And first, because I sacrificed some realism for the sake of creating a dark, almost nightmarish atmosphere around the Starlights. So they rally around star signs, for example, inspired by the title of Claire's book, which can look almost paganistic on the page. And I had the Starlights post on Reddit using phrases that were almost surreal, verging on poetic, just because I think that when people are very well spoken or use melodic turns of phrase when they're delivering a creepy message, it just makes the creepy content that much creepier. So I intentionally thwarted realism with the way that the Starlights speak to each other online, which makes them unlike groups we'd see in the real world. Also, Starlights are much more comfortable with invading Claire's privacy than any other fan base I know. On their Reddit thread, they actually have what looks like a running catalog of amateur paparazzi, and some fans photograph her trash. And while that may be true on the fringe of some fan bases for pop stars, it's more broadly accepted in the Starlight fandom. So if you were trying to find a real world analog for the Starlights, it would probably be on the edges of the bell curve for a pop star fandom. Starlights would be the exceptions to the rule, the fringe types just on a much larger scale. And while they might have the unity that you see in other fandoms, Starlights really come out of asking, okay, well, what if that unity had a dark bent to it? What if you were looking at it through a warped and tinted lens?
Great. One of the things I think is interesting about this book and all Missing Persons book is that the author's job is sort of to make a character out of somebody who's not generally there on the page for most of the book. And so I'm curious about how you developed the character of Claire, who is the author who goes missing, and sort of like how you make her feel well-rounded when she's absent, largely.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So the idea for Claire grew pretty organically out of her book. So I was thinking about the type of person who would be drawn to that story and who would be able to spend 10 years on it, what their personality would be, their strengths and weaknesses. But again, the book came first. And you're right, the reader doesn't have any firsthand information about Claire. You only have what her family says about her and what her book suggests about her, which sets up a really interesting parallel with how we form ideas about famous people in real life, because we don't have any firsthand information about them either, really. If you think about our creative cultural icons, most of the time, we only really know what other people say about them or what their work suggests about them. We only really see them through a very filtered lens. And, we don't know the people on the Billboard top 10 or the most prolific authors of our time. And so in that sense, they're all kind of missing people. We just construct them out of photos and video clips and hearsay. And so I really liked that parallel of thinking about famous people as missing people as famous people. And that really guided me in creating her character. And again, all of this taps into the idea that we don't really know our cultural icons, the people we love from a distance. And so it's just one more way that the book considers extreme fame.
Right. I am also interested in why you chose to set it where you set it, which is East Hampton.
Yes.
Uh,
So this
During
novel,
the
yeah, so it's set in Long Island during the off season, and I was just really captivated by how moody and brooding that landscape can be. You have the gray water, the damp sand, the whispering dunes, the beaches are empty, the lifeguard stands are packed up and stowed for winter. And that setting lent itself really well to the atmosphere of this story, which is dark and intense, contemplative, and beautiful, even when it's scary. And every time I brought in the landscape, it intensified those emotions in a really subtle but effective way. And I was also attracted to this landscape because I think it's unfamiliar to most people. I think the Hamptons that people come for is the bright, crowded Hamptons. It's the summertime, extroverted Hamptons. That's the setting that people can visualize, that people might know themselves. But the off season is one that people might not know that much about. My favorite terrible thing also focuses on Nina as an outsider. So she lives and works alone. She doesn't fit in with the people who employ her, and she doesn't work in towns where she can afford to shop. And the off season is this really wonderful echo of her personality as the more neglected season, as the more solitary season. I've also spent a lot of time on Long Island, going to places like the amazing BookHampton. And so it was a setting where I really had a feeling for the details and could incorporate specific sensory moments. So that was my thinking there.
Great. Um, Another big theme, it's difficult to talk about this book without giving too much away, but a theme in the book is identity. And so can you sort of share your abstract thoughts on that?
Yes. So that is a very interesting idea, and it's definitely layered in this story. First, because the subject of Claire's book is reincarnation, and so it shows the shifting of each soul through dozens of identities over thousands of years. So the Starlit Ballet puts forward the idea that no matter how you change, there's an invisible fundamental part of you that stays the same. And this idea of identity also comes up in some of Nina's history. No spoilers, but just to share a little bit more about Nina now is that she did pretend to be a Harvard student back in her early 20s when she was working at the school, just so that she could drop in on classes. So she would sit in the back of big lectures and try not to draw attention to herself. And if she was spotted, she'd immediately start to talk like the Ivy League students around her. She'd use evasion and suggestion to pass as one of the students. As an investigator as well, she's really conscious of the lifestyle gap between herself and the fancy people who employ her. So once again, she tries to blend in and she dresses like the people who employ her. She adopts their mannerisms and ways of speaking so that her employers never feel uncomfortable, so that the conversations stay as easy as possible. And I could give more examples of the shifting identity theme, but they'd be spoilers. So I think it's fair to say that this book takes the perspective that identity is always in flux. And I think the fact that My Favorite Terrible Thing focuses on the author of a fictional story, it makes that idea of character creation more top of mind. And so there are a lot of interesting ways that My Favorite Terrible Thing gets at the idea of impersonation and assuming different roles on the surface while we remain fundamentally the same.
Cool. All right. I have some more questions about the theme, but I think I'm going to punt those to the end to make sure that we have time to get to them, because we do want to leave room for a Q&A from you all who are attending as well. So don't forget to put your questions in the Q&A box as they occur to you. I have noticed, Madeleine, that you have a pretty large social media following. And so I would love for you to talk about how you used social media while you were writing the book.
Absolutely. So, yes, and on my social media, I do follow you, which is one of the more important things I can do on social media. So while I was writing My Favorite Terrible Thing, I spoke to my followers on Instagram every day about the process for about a year. So I introduced the story as a reincarnation love story. I would share tidbits from what I was learning about the different time periods. And then I was very open about changing the story to become a detective story. And I brought people into the everyday concerns and questions that I had. For example, sometimes I look at paint wheels when I'm choosing the color for an object just because I overthink everything. So I would show the paint wheels to my followers. And so I was very open about the writing, which was an interesting experience because novel writing is usually intensely solitary. But I have put those writing updates on the back burner for the moment, just because now I do have a new release and I don't really want to distract from that conversation. I'd much rather talk with readers about My Favorite Terrible Thing, which publishes tomorrow, than about anything further away.
Getting more into your process, what is the best piece of writing advice that you've ever received?
That's an amazing question. I have benefited from a lot of wonderful writing advice. And I would say that the piece of advice that I still struggle with, that I have to keep giving myself over and over again, is not to edit too soon. There was this wonderful book by Natalie Goldberg called Writing Down the Bones, which I got as a gift maybe 10 years ago. And in the book, she talks about separating the creator in yourself from the editor or internal censor. And she reminds people that the creator has to be given room to breathe and explore and express before the editor comes in and makes everything beautiful. She says that you are not trying to control your writing, you're trying to step out of the way. And I just think I have the kind of personality where I like things to be done quickly and I like things to be neat. And so I have to make a real persistent, conscious effort to remind myself that it's actually really important for things to take time, and it's really important for there to be a beginning phase of the project where everything is incredibly messy and wild and unchecked. And I really admire authors who are able to stick with the messy stage for longer, because that's where a lot of interesting stuff happens. Like authors who give themselves permission to explore diversions. So I am getting better and better with that over time, but it does take a conscious effort to think, okay, to create first, let the creator be crazy for a bit, and then to come back and make everything beautiful and to make everything make sense. One last great piece of advice that I heard David Sedaris give is to separate writing from publishing. I think if you get too focused on publishing and the metrics of publishing, then you might lose touch with, the real work as the writer. Because as the writer, what matters most is writing and staying connected to that.
Thank you. So this is your third novel, am I correct?
Yes.
So what will you sort of put into context your first two and how this connects to those? And how it's
Absolutely.
a departure
Yeah.
from those as well?
Absolutely. So, my first novel was a comedy about an investment banker who desperately wants to be a yogi. So, it's satire of the New York City financial crowd, but it doesn't spare the yogis either and pokes fun at the workout industry that's grown out of the spiritual practice. My first job was out of college, was at Goldman Sachs. And so the book has been treated, by some people in some situations as a roman clef for the investment bank. People will say what they will. And then my second novel was completely different. It was a love story about a physicist who tries to prove that the ones we love are always connected to us. It was written in a completely different tone from the first. So while the first novel was provocative and sarcastic and edgy, the love proof was earnest and heart-wrenching. So polar opposites. And now my favorite terrible thing is a suspense with a mystery element. So to make sense of the switches, I would just say that I'm creatively attracted to all genres. There's definitely a part of me that would love to write science fiction, and a part that would love to write historical fiction and more comedy and more romance. So when I'm unself-consciously creative, a lot of different forms and genres do come out. But sometime after my second novel, I started to think longer term. And I believe that to have some longevity as an author, it helps to be consistent. It helps when your readers know generally what to expect. Otherwise, it'll probably be hard to maintain an audience. And so sometime after my second novel, I thought, well, if I'm going to keep writing, then I really should be more consistent in terms of genre. And the question of what do I want to write today is very different from the question of what do I want to write over and over again. So I really do like the suspense genre with a mystery element. I like mind bending and I like pretty sentences. So I do view my favorite terrible thing as the beginning of a direction where I would like to continue. So hopefully there will be more consistency going forward.
Great. Who else do you like to read in the genre that you're working in now?
Yes, well, not to put you on the spot, but I have to be honest, and say that, well, your work, Liz, is honestly the gold standard, and I'm really excited for everyone to read The God of the Woods, which is coming out in July. But I won't embarrass you too much. Um,
Thanks.
so, but in general, in the suspense and mystery space, I tend to reach for books where the language is really beautiful, but where there's also a really compelling plot. Where the author brings almost a poetic lens to the story, but and so at this point, and my taste could change, but I do tend to value style a little bit more than plot in my own reading, because no matter how good a plot is, I generally won't stick with a book if the writing just doesn't do it for me, and vice versa. I will stick with a book if I love the writing, no matter what it's about. I love when the language is simple, but surprising me at the sentence level over and over again, when there are layered meanings in the details. So I tend to say that Marisha Pessl is one of my favorite authors. She, as I said earlier, wrote Night Film and Special Topics in Calamity Physics. In that vein, I also really enjoyed I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Makkai, and I really enjoyed Night Watching by Tracy Sierra. Outside of the genre, I do read some science fiction. And when it comes to science fiction, I love for the writing to be really stripped down and spare so that the ideas are paramount. And in that space, I love Blake Crouch. I'll read anything that he writes. I also read what everyone else is loving. So just because I like to know what's resonating with people. So I read really buzzy bestsellers. I think it's fair to say that I read pretty widely, but I don't read all the time. I tend to read more in phases when I'm writing less, just because after writing all day, I don't usually reach for a book to unwind. I was recently having this conversation with a friend who works in TV, and she can't watch TV to relax because she can't stop herself from thinking critically about TV. And she'll think about what shots they're using and what they would do differently. So just after, when I'm in an intense writing phase, at the end of the day, I just like to use different muscles.
Great. All right. I am going to ask one more question now, and then I will turn it over to Abby to moderate a Q&A with our virtual audience, but I do have a couple more questions in case I get the chance to ask them. So I guess I'll just end my portion with what is next for you.
Okay, so what is next is, well, tomorrow is the big pub day, so we're super excited. But then more broadly, what's next is I do have another novel coming out next year, and I won't say too much about it, except that those who enjoyed My Favorite Terrible Thing will probably also like the next one. It's another suspense with a mystery element, and as a teaser, I'll say that it stars a wildly creative painter, Devin. She's newly engaged, and the book begins with her meeting her future in-laws for the first time. On my Instagram, I've previewed that it's for anyone who likes a wicked puzzle or who wants to walk in a changing maze. Anyone who's ever wondered, are my in-laws insane or am I? So that will be out next year.
Excellent. Cool. Abby, are you there?
I am here, and we have some great questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and hop right into those. Here's one. So your two previous novels have settings and details that seem drawn from your real life, which open for interpretation there. Is this book further away from that? If so, did it feel like a different experience to write it? That's interesting.
That is very interesting. I think that there's always an emotional seed from my own life that then grows into whatever the novel becomes. And so I think that in that way, I identify with some songwriters who really pull on emotional moments in their own lives to set the mood for their song. But so it's more obvious that I'm drawing from those emotional moments in my first book, which is literally set in an investment bank that is, similar to one that I have worked at in some ways. But I think that the impulse to take something that I've gone through and to fictionalize and dramatize and explore it is definitely a thread throughout all my work. And I do think that as my plots get more and more complex, which they do, then it does get further away from personal experience, and it becomes more architectural, and it becomes more about wondering what is the craziest way that this could go. So I am having more fun with structure as I continue to write and in making things more complex. But I think it is a theme throughout all my work that there's something very sincere at the core of it. And I hope that that makes it relatable, because if it's coming from something honest in my life, then it probably will resonate with other people.
Mhm. Oh, that's such an interesting evolution while still keeping that common thread. That's so cool.
I just wanted to, I'm gonna go dark and mute myself just to keep the focus on Madeleine. Thank you both so much for having me. Congrats, and I'm gonna be listening to your answers as well. So thank you both.
Liz is always there.
Happy you're here, Liz.
Hold on, if I can figure that out. If anyone else can remove me.
I can.
There we go.
Perfect. All right. This one is fun. Are you wearing a black turtleneck in honor of Claire? Which actually
Yes, I am. That is someone who has read the book. That is amazing. Thank you for pointing that out. I hope that the question askers not also identify with other Starlight qualities, but yes. So thank you for pointing.
That's a fun little Easter egg. Oh my gosh, I love that. Okay, here's another one. So as we discussed earlier, this is a new genre for you.
Yes.
What are some of the satisfying and also frustrating aspects of writing a thriller?
Interesting. So I would say that I'm still getting used to how to work humor into really dark atmospheres, because it's much more I actually am a really light person, or at least I consider myself to be a very light person. And so I have this instinct to be incorporating humor a lot in my own life, and like I always have this impulse for humor. And then I'm still working at how to incorporate humor into darker, heavier books. So I actually don't think there was much humor in My Favorite Terrible Thing at all. So I would say that's one of the challenges, is just kind of coming out of the mood and breaking it and allowing for more variety within it. I would say one of the more satisfying things about writing a thriller is it's introduced me to a bunch of new readers who never have reached for either of my books before. It's funny. I remember when I was in BookHampton actually a few months ago, and I walk in and I was gonna just check on the love proof or something. And so the person right behind me says to someone working at the store, they said, "Hi, I'd like a book. Can you help me? I'm looking for something, anything but a love story." And so there are definitely new readers that wouldn't have reached for my book before. And so I'm meeting a lot of new people that way. And so I'd say that that's a really satisfying part of getting into a new genre.
Expanding the audience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, this is interesting. So I don't know if you have a copy of the book with you, so this can be the
No,
second.
but I know it very well, so.
But yeah, if you have a favorite section of the book, this particular audience member would love to hear about it.
Okay, because I definitely do have a favorite section, but it is a spoiler. So I will say it in a way that does not reveal what the spoiler is. But I love, there's a turn in the middle that takes place, and it's when the reader realizes what the truth is about when the reader realizes the truth that about the private investigator, which is not a spoiler because there's a lot that's going on. But because I did not plot that out as I was writing, and so I was just experiencing it as a reader as I was going through it, and I was shocked. I was like, "What is happening?" And so that was a really interesting experience for me, and I think that the book is definitely shocking people. And I think that that's because in creating it, it was completely unanticipated on my own creation side. And so it's if it surprised me, it's going to surprise other people.
That's so fun when like even the writers get surprised by the twist.
Yeah.
I love it. So we've heard about so many books that you enjoyed or drew inspiration from or particular genres, books that you enjoyed reading, but what is your favorite book?
Of all time.
That's the question in the
Okay, this
Q&A.
person does not mess around. Like, who is your favorite child? Answer now. Do not hesitate. Okay, so I actually do have an answer. And by now I will have mentioned this author 3 times in 45 minutes. So I'm basically a starlight for this person, like obviously. So I really love the book Night Film by Marisha Pessl. So I have in my office, I have just a very small stack of books, a row of books that I just love and are very special to me. And so Night Film is one of them. I read when I first started reading it, maybe last summer. I just read it. I opened it and I read it for the next few days. Like I just disappeared. And I think it was because the ideas in the book were so just atmospheric and rich and interesting. And it's a multimedia novel. So it's so basically you're reading a bunch of news articles and magazine articles and internet chats as you are trying to solve the murder of this famous director's daughter. And every sentence is really well crafted, which in a book of 500 to 600 pages is an incredible accomplishment. And so I find it to be my favorite book.
I also love that book, so can confirm for the
It's
audience.
amazing.
Wonderful.
People
And
should talk about it more.
I was gonna say if you want to bundle two like suspense thrillers, this would be the time to get Night Film in addition.
Ah, there you
There
go.
you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
All right. As you look to write your next book, what are you drawing from recently?
That's interesting. So the book that is coming out next year is already done. Like it's done. We're seeing a cover next week. Like I've seen the blurb on the back of the book. So the book that I'm writing right now will come out after that. And I'll just give like a little teaser because I like to be kind of open. So that book is about a vigilante group who systematically targets and attacks celebrities, claiming that they perpetuate class differences that are un-American. So it is also a suspense with a mystery element. I think it's really interesting in terms of the thematic ideas. I think it's in the zeitgeist. And so that's the one I'm writing on right now. And I think that I wrote my favorite terrible thing, next year's book, and that book kind of all at the same time. And there was just thinking about this idea of extreme fame is definitely being explored in The Last Celebrity and My Favorite Terrible Thing. So that's just a little bit about what I'm writing right now.
All right, y'all mark your calendars.
Yes, no distant future.
This might overlap a little with what you were just saying, but this person wants to know if there are any big issues that you would like to tackle in future suspense novels. So Liz's look at the opioid crisis in Long Dark River is given as an example.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that so after I finish the book that I'm currently working on, I actually don't have a next book after that. In my you empty out at some point, like, okay, now I need to actually make something from scratch new again. And so I don't have that next idea after that. But I am looking forward to being open again because I think that there's something about writing which does narrow you because you've chosen your focus and then you just have to go deep. And so I'm really excited to broaden and widen and explore and see what I might find interesting and kind of be new to something, because I've been deep in these 3 books for a while now.
Yeah, especially like writing them all together in that same space.
Yeah.
So this person wants to know if you've read Cloud Atlas and whether it inspires you.
Yes, so Cloud Atlas, which I'm sure everybody knows about, but I will give a quick refresher, is the book by David Mitchell, which, similar to the Starlit Ballet, is about soulmates or about souls who reincarnate and cross paths in every lifetime across historical eras. So pretty similar. But I would say that the Starlit Ballet is distinct from Cloud Atlas in their chief concern. And the Cloud Atlas is chiefly concerned with the connectedness of all human activity and how acts of kindness and malice reverberate throughout time, and how basically everything is connected. And so the Cloud Atlas is an exploration of time and interconnectedness. And the chief concern of the Starlit Ballet is about the spiritual journey that the soulmates are on. So in the Starlit Ballet, the hypothesis is that souls return to Earth and mature, and once they are in, as they continue to mature, and once they are mature, they leave Earth, and they go on with their soulmate. And so the Starlit Ballet is more concerned with the inner journey, and with the spirit. And it seems like Cloud Atlas is more concerned with human activity and the material world and the interconnectedness of those events. So I would say that they are similar in the sense that there are souls who reincarnate and find each other. But Cloud Atlas and the Starlit Ballet have different focuses within that context.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's interesting. Um, okay, so let me see if I remember what you said correctly. You said the premise for the upcoming book
I
is
know, it's
if you've
confusing.
ever
Yeah.
wondered whether your in-laws are crazy or
Yes.
you are.
Yes.
So this person wants to know, how do your in-laws feel about that as the premise for the next book?
My in-laws have always been incredibly supportive of my writing, like beyond my wildest dreams. And just like from the day that I met them, just we were family. So I feel very comfortable with them, and they feel comfortable with me, so everything is good in my personal life. But yeah, I think that it's a saucy subject, and I love saying the premise, because everybody, whenever I say the premise, they just say, please use my life story in your book. Like, I have so many stories for you. Let me talk to you, please. So I think it's a really juicy subject. And I think it's gonna start a lot of conversation.
So excited. Um, and okay, I think this will be our last one this evening. So without any spoilers, what is the inspiration for the title? Can you speak on that a bit?
Yes. So my favorite terrible thing was not the original title. So basically, my editor rejected the original title rightly, saying it was not suspenseful enough. And so I came up with the new one, which I love because it was quite suspenseful. And it's layered, and so there are multiple favorite terrible things. And I love that it gives a preview for the language in the story, in that it is beautiful. And I tried to I like killed myself over these sentences. So the title just preview that it's the language is gorgeous, even if the content might not be. So I think that it gives a preview for the tone. It's suspenseful, it's layered, and it's ambiguous. So I think it's a good combo.
Working on multiple levels. Nice. All right. Well, thanks for all those questions, y'all. Those are so good. I loved getting to ask them. And now this evening, if you look at all of those links in the chat there, you basically have your whole summer reading planned. So you can kick things off with my favorite terrible thing, and then just go from there. Don't forget to pre-order The God of the Woods by Liz. Thank you again, Liz, for being here. If you haven't already pre-ordered, of course. And yep, talked about the links in the chat. And of course, you're also welcome to visit BookHampton in store. We are excited and ready to serve you books. So thank you, Madeleine, again. Congratulations. And can't wait to read all of the upcoming ones.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you. It's great to meet you. And thank you everyone for coming. It really means a lot. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, y'all, have a wonderful night, and we will see you at the next event. Take care, everybody.